Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Brush Up Your Shakespeare, where we make Shakespeare fun and easy, the way it was always meant to be. Today we are in Act 5, Scene 1 of Hamlet. We haven't seen Prince Hamlet for a few scenes now, but he will reappear here in this scene. We know from a letter Hamlet wrote to Horatio that he has escaped the death trap laid for him by King Claudius in England and has returned to Denmark. Hamlet writes a letter to Claudius as well, telling him that Hamlet is back in Denmark. Ophelia has managed to drown herself, but from the description given by Queen Gertrude, it is hard to tell whether Ophelia actually meant to kill herself or whether it was an accident. Ophelia's brother, Laertes, is saddened and angry as hell over the fact his father, Polonius, was killed by Hamlet while Laertes was off in France. Now returned to Denmark, Laertes finds his sister has gone mad, and as a result, she drowns. Claudius takes Laertes aside, and they come up with a cunning plan to get rid of Hamlet once and for all. In a friendly fencing match, Laertes will stab and kill Hamlet with a real sword with no button on the tip. And if that doesn't work, Laertes will poison his sword, so if he only scratches Hamlet, he will die. And if Laertes doesn't even get a scratch in, Claudius will give Hamlet a cup of wine to drink in celebration of Hamlet's victory. Oh, yes, there will be poison in the wine, of course. But the fencing match must wait until the next scene. The scene we are in today, Act 5, Scene 1, takes place entirely in a graveyard. Sounds pretty morose and macabre, doesn't it? And indeed, it will get that way about halfway through the scene. But things have been getting pretty heavy in this play, and Shakespeare takes this opportunity to give the audience a break with one of his funniest comedy sketches. Yes, a comedy sketch in a graveyard. The scene opens on two gravediggers plying their trade in a graveyard. One is the straight man, the other is the guy who gets all the punchlines. They might as well be Abbott and Costello or Martin and Lewis. Here is an example of their vaudeville banter. Here is the title slide, Hamlet Act 5, Scene 1, the line for the day, alas, poor Yorick. And here is the banter between the gravediggers. The gravedigger says, "What is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter?" The other gravedigger, who in the Folger's version that I'm borrowing from doesn't even get a name, he's just called Other. This is the straight man, right? The other gravedigger says, "The gallows maker, for that frame outlives 1,000 tenants." Well, that's pretty funny. And the first gravedigger acknowledges it. "I like thy wit well, in good faith. The gallows does well. But how does it well? It does well to those that do ill. Now thou dost ill to say the gallows is built stronger than the church." Argal, which is his bastardized way of saying ergo, Argal, the gallows may do well to thee. To it again, come. And the other gravedigger says, who builds stronger than a mason, a shipwright, or a carpenter? And the first gravedigger says, "I tell me that, and unyoke." And here, unyoke means end your mental labor because it's obviously a strain on your brain. And the other gravedigger says, "Marry, now I can tell." And the first gravedigger says, "To it." And the other gravedigger says, "Mass, I cannot tell." He can't come up with another answer. Now, in the background, enter Hamlet and Horatio, afar off, unseen by the gravediggers, but seen by the audience. And the first gravedigger gives his answer to the riddle by saying, "Cudgel thy brains no more about it, for your dull ass will not mend his pace with beating." Your brain's not going to go any quicker with cudgeling it. And when you are asked this question next, say, "A grave maker, the houses he makes lasts till doomsday." So there's the answer to that riddle. Now that Hamlet and Horatio have entered the scene, Hamlet comes forth to speak with the comedian gravedigger and finds himself drawn into a comedy skit as well. The humor is based largely on puns and extreme literalism. See if you can catch the pun work going on here in this exchange. Hamlet says, "I will speak to this fellow." He approaches. "Whose grave's this, sirrah?" The gravedigger says, "Mine, sir." Hamlet says, "I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest in it. The gravedigger says, you lie out on it, or you lie out of it, sir, and therefore 'tis not yours. For my part, I do not lie in it, yet it is mine. Hamlet says, thou dost lie in it, to be in it, and say it is thine. 'Tis for the dead. In other words, if you're still alive and you're standing in your grave and you say it's yours, that's a lie. So you do lie in it. Hamlet says, 'tis for the dead, not for the quick, and quick means living. Therefore thou liest. The gravedigger shoots back, 'tis a quick lie, sir. 'Twill away again from me to you, punning on the double meaning of the word quick. Hamlet says, what man dost thou dig it for? The gravedigger says, for no man, sir. Hamlet says, what woman then? The gravedigger says, for none either. Hamlet says, who is to be buried in it? And the gravedigger says, one that was a woman, sir, but rest her soul, she's dead. The gravedigger is digging the grave for somebody who once was a woman. We may be getting a sneaking suspicion as to whom this grave is for, but Hamlet has no idea, not having been in Denmark when Ophelia drowned. Hamlet continues to engage the gravedigger with a light-hearted back and forth, and we find in this next exchange that Shakespeare is not above taking a shot at his own English country people in order to make a joke. Hamlet says, how long hast thou been gravemaker? The gravedigger says, of all the days in the year, I came to it that day that our last king, Hamlet, overcame Fortinbras. Hamlet says, how long is that since? The gravedigger says, cannot you tell that? Every fool can tell that. It was that very day that young Hamlet was born, he that is mad and sent into England. Hamlet says, ay, marry, why was he sent into England? The gravedigger says, why, because he was mad. He shall recover his wits there. Or if he do not, 'tis no great matter there. Hamlet says, why? And the gravedigger replies, 'twill not be seen in him there. There the men are as mad as he. Digging graves 400 years ago was not as clean-cut an affair as it is today. And this gravedigger turns up the bones of previously buried people while he is digging this new grave. The gravedigger digs up a skull which he is able to identify as the royal jester named Yorick. The gravedigger says, I have been sexton here, that's a gravedigger, I have been sexton here, man and boy, 30 years. Here's a skull now, hath lain you in the earth 23 years. Hamlet says, whose is it? The gravedigger says, a whoreson mad fellow's it was. Whose do you think it was? Hamlet says, nay, I know not. And the gravedigger says, a pestilence on him for a mad rogue. He poured a flagon of Rhenish, or a cup of wine, on my head once. This same skull, sir, was, sir, Yorick's skull, the king's jester. Hamlet says, this? The gravedigger says, even that. Hamlet says, taking the skull, let me see. This leads into perhaps the most famous single vignette in all of Shakespeare, that of Hamlet holding a skull in his hand and speaking directly to it. A brief word about Yorick. Yorick died 23 years ago when Hamlet was only 7. We can imagine Hamlet's father, the king, being quite busy attending to affairs of state, and Yorick, naturally a favorite as a jester, assuming a role in Hamlet's life as a sort of surrogate father. We understand how close Hamlet was to Yorick in this next speech, which begins with Hamlet talking to Horatio about Yorick, then shifts in the middle to Hamlet talking directly to the skull itself. Hamlet says, alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath bore me on his back 1,000 times. And here he's talking about piggyback rides. And now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips, referencing the skull. Here hung those lips that I have kissed, I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? And here he talks directly to the skull as if he's addressing Yorick and as if Yorick can hear him and understand him. Where be your jibes now? And jibes are taunts. Your gambols or dances, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar. Not one now to mock your own grinning? Quite chap fallen. Here is a pun. because chapfallen means dejected, but literally it means without a lower jaw being called a chap. Now, get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint or apply makeup, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that. This speech contains the line for today, alas, poor Yorick. We usually repeat the line for today a number of times throughout the show, but I think you can probably remember this one without that much practice since it's only 3 words long. Just remember, if you go on and quote the next line, it is, I knew him, Horatio, not I knew him well. For some reason, saying, I knew him well has managed to worm its way into common usage, though it is never said in the play. It's sort of like how it is common to think Humphrey Bogart said, play it again, Sam, in Casablanca, but that line is actually never spoken in the movie. The Yorick speech is wonderfully dark. And who is Hamlet referring to when he says, my lady's chamber? What lady? The answer would seem to have to be Ophelia. Here Hamlet speaks more than he knows, and both Hamlet and Horatio hide themselves again when they see a train of people approaching the graveyard. Enter the king, queen, Laertes, lord's attendant, and the corpse of Ophelia with a doctor of divinity, i.e., a priest. Hamlet says to Horatio, but soft a while. Here comes the king, the queen, the courtiers. Who is this they follow? And with such maimed rites or abbreviated ceremony. This doth betoken the course or corpse. The corpse they follow did with desperate hand fordo its own life, and fordo there means undo or take its own life. What he is seeing indicates that the corpse that's going to be buried took its own life because the rites are maimed. It's an abbreviated ceremony. And yet he says, 'twas of some estate, couch or hide we a while and mark or observe. Hamlet deduces that because the burial rites performed by the accompanying priest are maimed, the corpse they follow committed suicide. And yet, the dead person must have been of some rank to be accompanied by the king and queen. Those who committed suicide in Hamlet's day were not permitted the full rites of Christian burial, being seen as sinners. Ophelia's case is complicated by the fact that it isn't completely clear she intentionally drowned herself. She also is a young woman of some rank, being the daughter of the king's chamberlain, and the church has agreed to give her some of the burial rites, but not all. Laertes argues about this with the priest. He says, I tell thee, churlish priest, a ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling in hell, is the reference there. Hamlet says to Horatio, he's still hidden, right? What? The fair Ophelia? This is the first indication Hamlet has that this is actually Ophelia who's dead and being buried. The queen says now, sweets to the sweet, farewell. And yep, that's where that expression comes from. And she scatters flowers. I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife, she says to the corpse of Ophelia. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not have strewed thy grave. And Laertes gives voice to the anger and fury he's feeling about Hamlet even now. O treble woe fall 10 times treble on that cursed head whose wicked deed thy most ingenious sense deprive thee of. Hold off the earth a while, till I have caught her once more in mine arms. And he leaps into the grave. Laertes is so overcome with grief, he actually leaps into the grave to hug his sister's body one more time before she is buried. Hamlet has just found out that the body to be buried is that of Ophelia, and his love for her comes rushing back to him with overwhelming force. And Hamlet now comes out of hiding and reveals himself. Hamlet says, advancing, what is he whose grief bears such an emphasis, talking about Laertes, obviously, whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars and makes them stand like wonder-wounded hearers. This is I, Hamlet the Dane. And Laertes, now coming out of the grave, says, the devil take thy soul. Hamlet says, thou prayest not well. And they grapple and fight. Laertes trying to kill Hamlet, and Hamlet trying to defend himself. Hamlet has no idea why Laertes is trying to kill him, but is very certain that his own love for Ophelia is far greater than that of Laertes. After the two are parted and the fight is broken up, Hamlet says, I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. Dost thou come here to whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave? Be buried quick, and that means alive here. Be buried quick with her, and so will I. This is crazy. Hamlet is arguing that he loved Ophelia best, better than her brother, and he is saying this at her funeral to her brother Laertes in front of everybody. This, of course, incenses Laertes beyond description. Both the king and the queen try to calm Laertes down by reminding him that Hamlet is sort of off his rocker and shouldn't be held accountable for everything he says. So don't take him too seriously. Finally, Hamlet does calm down a bit and expresses his confusion over Laertes hating on him so much. Hamlet says, Hear you, sir. What is the reason that you use me thus? I loved you ever. But it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew, and dog will have his day. Yep, that's where that expression comes from. Hamlet exits now, and the king says to Horatio, I pray thee, good Horatio, wait upon him. Horatio exits, and now the king says to Laertes, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. Claudius reminds Laertes of their last night's speech, referring to the plan to murder Hamlet and get him out of the way once and for all. And this ends the scene. There is only one more scene left in Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2. And this is where everything will come to a head, when Claudius and Laertes put into action their plan to kill Hamlet. Will it succeed? Will it go wrong? Will it go horribly wrong? Will Hamlet die? Will anyone else die? Will just about every other important character in the play die? All of this and more, we will have to wait to find out. Until next time. Well, that's about all for tonight. Please remember, hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, and please leave a comment below as to your thoughts and ideas about today's show. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I especially want to thank those of you who have gone the extra mile to go to brushupyourshakespeare.org and make a donation. Whatever you can afford is absolutely wonderful. Your donations do keep Brush Up Your Shakespeare coming to you on a regular basis. Well, that's about all for now. Until next time, this is Brush Up Your Shakespeare, signing off the air.